In a silent mansion where every detail hides secrets, a widow watches the downfall of a once perfect family. What starts as suspicion becomes certainty when documents, glances, and notes reveal a web of lies. Tension erupts when the truth surfaces, dragging everyone into the depths of an unimaginable betrayal. But from the ruins of abandonment rises a strength that transforms pain into justice and silence into rebirth. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The morning sun streamed through the wide windows of the mansion in Belgravia, an upscale neighborhood of London, bathing the rosewood furniture and Italian marble floor that reflected the light like a polished mirror. Mrs. Eleanor Morrison, at 73 years old, walked slowly down the main corridor, her fingers lightly brushing the wall covered in imported silk paper. She wore a simple but elegant light blue dress, and her white hair was neatly tied in an impeccable bun. A widow for almost 10 years, she spent her days tending the house garden, where she cultivated roses, jasmine, and rare orchids that were her only true company. The mansion was too large for just one person, but Eleanor was not alone. Her only son, Robert Morrison, had built an empire in technology and philanthropy. He was admired by everyone, always on the covers of business magazines, always with a polite smile and inspiring words. He had been married for 7 years to Michelle Foster, a stunning woman who commanded the vibrant Hope Foundation, dedicated to social projects in deprived communities of the capital city. Michelle was charismatic, spoke well, dressed with discreet elegance, and had a gift for winning over entire audiences with her fiery rhetoric on social justice and life transformation. But Eleanor had never managed to feel genuine affection for her daughter-in-law. From the first day Michelle entered that house, something in her gaze caused discomfort in the matriarch. It was a look that changed according to the audience, too sweet with Robert, too calculated with strangers, and too cold when she thought no one was watching. Eleanor had tried several times to talk about this with her son, but he always laughed, saying she was becoming too suspicious with age, that Michelle was perfect, that she did a wonderful job helping people. That Thursday morning, Eleanor was watering her rose bushes when she heard the familiar sound of the electronic gate opening. It was Michelle arriving. Always punctual, always elegant. Her high heels announced her presence even before she appeared. Eleanor continued watering the flowers, pretending not to have noticed. Michelle walked through the garden in a hurry, holding a brown leather briefcase under her arm, talking on her cell phone. Her words were sweet, even syrupy, but there was something forced in that tone. Eleanor had noticed this a long time ago, but had learned to keep her observations to herself. The house had a well-established routine. Robert left early for the office, returning only late in the afternoon, exhausted from meetings and commitments. Michelle also had a full agenda, dividing her time between charity events, meetings with sponsors, and visits to the communities assisted by the foundation. Or at least that's what she said. Eleanor had noticed that many of these outings were too quick to be true. Sometimes Michelle would leave saying she would spend the day in the field, but she would return in 2 hours, not a hair out of place, without any sign of tiredness. There was also the driver. His name was Colin Taylor, a man in his early 40s, thin, with a sad look and few words. He had worked for the family for 4 years, always discreet, always punctual. Eleanor saw him as someone invisible, almost a piece of furniture in the house, but in recent months she had started to notice something strange. Colin and Michelle exchanged glances. They were not casual glances. They were glances loaded with meaning, complicity, perhaps even intimacy. Several times Eleanor had seen them talking softly in the side garden, near the garage, always interrupting their conversation when someone approached. The first concrete clue that something was wrong came on a Monday morning. Eleanor was walking through the garden when she saw a white envelope on the ground, near the jasmine bed. She found it odd, as the area was always clean. She bent down, picked up the envelope, and saw that it had no recipient. Just a handwritten note, with nervous, shaky handwriting. The words were few but impactful. They said that the Vibrant Hope Foundation was involved in financial embezzlement, that fictitious social projects were used as a facade for suspicious money movements, and that someone needed to investigate before it was too late. There was no signature. Eleanor felt her heart race. She put the note in her dress pocket and went back inside the house, trying to remain calm. She couldn't accuse Michelle without proof. Robert would never believe her based only on an anonymous note. She needed concrete evidence. Over the next few days, she began to observe everything more closely. She noticed that Michelle kept documents locked in a drawer of her personal office on the mansion's second floor. Whenever someone approached, she would quickly lock the drawer and put the key in her purse. One afternoon, Eleanor took advantage of Michelle being out for a meeting and Robert traveling on business. She went up to her daughter-in-law's office. The door was unlocked. She entered slowly, feeling guilty for invading someone else's privacy, but driven by the need to protect her son. The environment was modern, with a glass desk, shelves full of books on social management, and framed photographs of Michelle at charity events, always surrounded by smiling children and grateful families. Everything seemed too perfect. Eleanor opened the drawers that were not locked. She found common papers, contracts, event folders, nothing suspicious. But then, while wiping the desk with a cloth to avoid leaving traces of her presence, she accidentally knocked over a heavy picture frame. It fell to the floor, and behind it, taped to the wall, was a small folded paper. Eleanor picked it up and carefully unfolded it. It was a handwritten note, apparently scribbled in a hurry. It listed names of social projects that she recognized as programs terminated by the foundation the previous year. Next to each name were very high values, followed by recent dates. How was it possible to move money in the name of projects that no longer existed? She photographed the paper with her cell phone, put everything back in place, and left the office. She went down the stairs quickly, her heart pounding, and went straight to her room. She locked herself in and began to cross-reference the information from the anonymous note with the notes she had found. Everything made sense. Michelle was using terminated projects as a facade to embezzle money. But where was this money going, and who else was involved in this? Eleanor decided she needed to act cautiously. She couldn't confront Michelle directly, nor speak to Robert before having irrefutable proof. He loved his wife and would never believe she was capable of something like this. She needed help, but didn't know whom to trust. It was then that she remembered a news report she had seen on television weeks ago. A young journalist named Philip Carter was doing a series of investigative reports on charities in London. He seemed committed to the truth, someone who couldn't be bought. Perhaps he could help. That night, Eleanor barely slept. The images of the hidden paper, the glances between Michelle and Colin, the anonymous note, everything spun in her mind like an out-of-control carousel. She knew she was opening a box of secrets that could destroy her family, but she also knew she couldn't remain silent while her son was deceived by his own wife. For the first time in many years, Eleanor felt she had a mission, to protect Robert, whatever the cost, even if it meant confronting Michelle and revealing the truth behind that facade of perfection she had so carefully built over the years. Philip Carter was a 32-year-old journalist who worked for an independent online newspaper called London Truth. Thin, with round glasses and disheveled hair, he had a reputation for being stubborn and incorruptible. His reports on embezzlement in NGOs had generated repercussions in the city, and he constantly received veiled threats from powerful people who didn't want their secrets exposed. But Philip was not easily intimidated. He came from a humble family, having grown up watching his mother work as a cleaner in 3 different jobs to support him and his siblings. He knew well the difference between true charity and facade charity. For weeks, Philip had been investigating the Vibrant Hope Foundation. Something didn't add up. Public figures showed millionaire investments in various social projects, but when he tried to visit these beneficiary communities, he found closed doors, non-existent addresses, or people who had never heard of the foundation. Every time he requested an interview with Michelle Foster, he received evasive answers from the press office. She was always too busy, traveling, in urgent meetings. It was becoming clear that they didn't want a curious journalist asking questions. On a rainy Friday afternoon, Philip received an anonymous email. The sender claimed to have important information about the foundation and suggested a discreet meeting at a coffee shop in the city centre. Philip was suspicious it could be a trap, but his journalistic curiosity spoke louder. He scheduled the meeting for the next day at 3 in the afternoon at a small, quiet cafe on Oxford Street. When he arrived at the location, Philip ordered a black coffee and sat at a back table from where he could observe the entrance. He waited for almost half an hour. He was already losing hope when he saw an elegant lady with white hair and a navy blue dress enter the cafe looking around nervously. It was Eleanor. She identified him by the description he had left in the reply email, a young man with glasses and a green backpack. Eleanor sat in front of him and remained silent for a few seconds, as if gathering courage. Philip waited patiently. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low but firm. She said she was Robert Morrison's mother, owner of the foundation, and that she had reasons to believe that her daughter-in-law, Michelle, was involved in something very wrong. She showed him the photos of the paper she had found in the office, explained about the anonymous note, and reported her observations about Michelle's and the driver's strange behavior. Philip listened carefully, making notes in a battered notebook. When Eleanor finished, he sighed. He said he was already investigating the foundation on his own, and that her information confirmed his suspicions. But they needed more proof: official documents, bank records, reliable witnesses. Eleanor asked how they could get that. Philip replied that he needed someone from the inside, someone who had access to the foundation's files. It was then that Eleanor mentioned Colin, the driver. She said he seemed tormented, that he might know things he couldn't reveal out of fear. Philip agreed it was worth trying to approach him. In the following days, Eleanor began to observe Colin more closely. She noticed that he always arrived early, before everyone else, and sat in the car in the garage for long minutes before entering the house. He seemed burdened, as if the weight of some secret was consuming him from within. One morning, she took advantage of Michelle still sleeping and went to the garage. Colin was there, cleaning the car. When he saw her, he tensed but greeted her politely. Eleanor started a casual conversation, asking how he was, if his family was doing well. Colin replied in monosyllables, clearly uncomfortable. Then Eleanor changed strategy. She said she knew he was carrying something heavy in his heart, that she could see it in his eyes. She said she wasn't there to judge him, but to help him. Colin stopped cleaning the car and stared at her. His eyes were moist. He seemed to be on the verge of an emotional collapse. With a choked voice, Colin confessed that he was living a nightmare. Years ago, when he was 28 and unemployed, he had benefited from a program of the Vibrant Hope Foundation. He had received a scholarship for a technical mechanics course which had changed his life. He had found work, supported his family, had dignity. That's why, when the foundation invited him to work as a driver, he accepted with gratitude. But little by little, he began to notice strange things. Michelle sent him to pick up envelopes at suspicious addresses, always alone without Robert knowing. He transported documents he should never have seen, and then, a year ago, everything got worse. Colin recounted that Michelle had seduced him. It was subtle at first: compliments, accidental touches, invitations for private conversations. He was married, had 2 children, loved his wife, but Michelle was persistent. In a moment of weakness, he gave in. They started meeting in secret. But that wasn't love. It was manipulation. Michelle photographed him in intimate moments, kept evidence, and when he wanted to end everything, she threatened him. She said that if he told anyone, she would destroy his life. She would show the photos to his wife, accuse him of harassment, invent stories. Furthermore, she had discovered that Colin had an old debt with loan sharks and offered to pay it, trapping him even further. Eleanor listened to everything in silence, feeling a mixture of pity and indignation. Colin was imprisoned, not by bars, but by fear and guilt. She encouraged him to tell everything to Philip, the journalist. She said he could protect him, that together they could expose the truth. Colin hesitated, saying he was afraid of what Michelle could do, but Eleanor held his hands and said that the fear would only end when the truth came to light. Colin took a deep breath and agreed to help. The same day, Eleanor scheduled another meeting with Philip, this time in a public park, where the chances of being seen were smaller. She brought Colin with her. The driver told the journalist everything he knew. He spoke about the mysterious envelopes, about phantom company addresses, about conversations he had overheard between Michelle and unknown people. Philip wrote everything down, asking for details, dates, times. He said that with this information, he could start building a complete dossier. But they needed physical documents. Colin mentioned that Michelle kept a safe in her office. He had never seen what was inside, but he once saw her opening and closing it quickly when he entered without knocking. Eleanor knew where this safe was. It was built into the wall behind a large painting depicting a countryside landscape, but she didn't have the password. Philip suggested they needed help from someone who knew how to break into safes without leaving traces. Eleanor was shocked by the suggestion, but he explained that there would be no forced entry, just a technical attempt, something that wouldn't leave evidence. Meanwhile, Robert began to notice that something was different at home. Michelle seemed irritated all the time, spoke on the phone in a low voice, locked herself in the office for hours. When he asked if everything was all right, she smiled and said it was just work stress, that the foundation was growing and demanded a lot from her. He believed her, but a small seed of doubt began to germinate in his mind. Eleanor noticed this and knew she would soon have to talk to her son, but it wasn't time. Yet, she needed irrefutable proof. One night, Eleanor was in her room when she received a message from Colin. He said Michelle was planning something. He had heard her talking on the phone about the need to silence someone who was asking too many questions. She didn't mention names, but the tone was threatening. Eleanor felt a chill. Was it about Philip or about herself? She realized that time was running out. They needed to act fast before Michelle realized she was being investigated and took drastic measures to protect her secrets. The mansion had acquired a heavy atmosphere, as if the walls knew the secrets they hid and were about to collapse under their weight. Eleanor woke up every morning with a tightness in her chest, knowing that each day brought her closer to a painful truth that would forever change her son's life. But she couldn't retreat. She had gone too far. Philip was assembling the dossier, Colin had agreed to testify, and she herself had become an unlikely investigator in her own home. That Tuesday, Eleanor woke up earlier than usual. The sun had not yet fully risen when she went down to the garden. It was her refuge, the only place where she could think clearly. While watering the rose bushes, she noticed something different. Among the branches of a hydrangea bush, there was a small folded paper fastened with a pin. Her heart raced. She looked around, making sure she was alone, and picked up the paper. It was a handwritten note in Colin's handwriting. It just said, "Today, 3 p.m, she will meet someone at the Roma Cafe, Regent Street. It could be important." Eleanor put the note in her bathrobe pocket and went back inside the house. Colin was leaving messages for her through the flowers, the only place Michelle never went. It was brilliant and dangerous at the same time. If Michelle found out, he would be confronted, and all the threats she had made would become reality. Eleanor needed to protect him, but she also needed that information. She decided she would go to the cafe that afternoon, discreetly, just to observe. She needed to see who Michelle was meeting with and, if possible, find out what they were talking about. At 2:30 p.m, Eleanor asked a housekeeper who worked in the house, Mrs. Irene, to take her to the city centre. She said she needed to buy a specific medicine at a compounding pharmacy. Mrs. Irene was a simple and loyal lady. She had worked for the family for over 15 years and always treated Eleanor with genuine affection. They took a taxi and headed for Regent Street. Eleanor asked to get off a few blocks earlier, saying she wanted to walk a bit. The Roma Cafe was a small, elegant establishment with tables on the sidewalk and decor reminiscent of Italy. Eleanor entered and sat in a strategic corner from where she could see the street but not be easily noticed. She ordered a chamomile tea and waited. Punctually at 3 o'clock, she saw the family car park in front of the cafe. Michelle got out, wearing large, dark sunglasses and a colourful scarf around her neck, as if she wanted to go unnoticed. Colin stayed in the car. Michelle entered the cafe and walked directly to a back table, where a man was already waiting for her. He was tall, in a dark suit, with grey hair and the appearance of an executive. Eleanor didn't recognize him. They greeted each other, with a formal handshake, but the tension between them was visible. Michelle spoke softly, but her gestures were nervous. The man seemed calm, almost bored, as if that conversation was just another business appointment. Eleanor tried to listen to the conversation, but they were too far away. She decided to risk it. She got up and walked towards the restroom, which was near their table. As she passed, she managed to catch fragments of the conversation. The man was saying something about deadlines, about values that needed to be adjusted. Michelle replied that everything was under control, that no one suspected anything, that the documents were well guarded. The man then mentioned a name, Project Rebirth. Eleanor felt a shock of recognition. This was one of the projects listed on the paper she had found in the office, a project officially terminated over a year ago. She returned to her table, her heart pounding. She took out her cell phone and discreetly photographed the man from afar. The image wasn't very clear, but it was enough for Philip to try to identify him. She stayed there for another 20 minutes. Michelle and the man finished their conversation. He paid the bill and left first. Michelle waited a few minutes before leaving as well, probably so they wouldn't appear to be together. Eleanor waited until both had left, paid for her tea, and left the cafe. She immediately called Philip and scheduled a meeting for that night. When she returned home, she was exhausted but satisfied. She had another piece of the puzzle. She went up to her room and sent the photos to Philip via message. He replied quickly, saying he would try to find out who the man was. Meanwhile, Eleanor realized she needed to maintain normalcy. She couldn't show that she knew anything, or Michelle would become suspicious. That night, Robert arrived earlier than usual. He seemed tired, but also worried. He sat in the living room with Eleanor, and they talked about trivialities for a few minutes. Then, he let out a heavy sigh and said he found Michelle's behavior strange. She was distant, avoided conversations, always seemed alert, as if she was hiding something. He asked his mother if she had noticed anything different. Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. This was the moment she feared. She couldn't lie to her son, but she also couldn't tell him everything yet, not without concrete proof. She decided to be cautious. She said she had indeed noticed that Michelle was more stressed, but that perhaps it was just the pressure of work at the foundation. Robert nodded, but his eyes showed that this answer did not completely satisfy him. He was starting to suspect, and that was both good and dangerous. The next morning, Eleanor found another note from Colin among the flowers. This time, the message was more urgent. "She is planning something for Thursday. I heard her say she will solve a problem once and for all. I'm afraid it's about you. Please be careful." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Thursday was 2 days away. What could Michelle be planning? She decided to tell Philip. They met again, this time in a public square during the morning. Philip had already managed to identify the man from the photos. His name was Marcus Allen, a financial consultant with a dubious history, previously investigated for money laundering, but never convicted due to lack of evidence. If he was involved with Michelle, the scheme was bigger and more dangerous than they imagined. Philip said he was close to getting access to the Foundation's bank records through a contact at the Crown Prosecution Service, but he needed a few more days. Eleanor told him about Colin's note and about the possible threat for Thursday. Philip became serious. He said she needed to be extremely careful, that she couldn't put herself at risk. He suggested she stay out of the house that day, visit a friend, invent an appointment. Eleanor refused. She said she wouldn't hide in her own home, that she needed to be there to protect her son and find out what Michelle was planning. On Wednesday, the eve of the appointed day, the tension in the mansion was palpable. Michelle was strangely cheerful, humming around the house, being overly kind to everyone. Eleanor recognized that behavior. It was the same as vipers displayed before striking. Robert spent the day at the office, and when he returned that night, Michelle was especially affectionate with him. She prepared a special dinner, opened a bottle of expensive wine, did everything to make it seem like everything was perfect between them. After dinner, Michelle went up to Eleanor's room. She knocked gently on the door and entered with a sweet smile. She said she was worried about her mother-in-law, that she seemed pale lately, and that she had an idea. How about a trip the next day? She knew a charming little town in the countryside, about 2 hours from London, with wonderful antique shops and a craft fair. It would be a relaxing day away from the chaos of the city. Colin could drive them. Eleanor felt every muscle in her body tense. This was a trap. She was absolutely sure, but she couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. She forced a smile and said it would be wonderful that it had been a long time since she had left London. Michelle seemed satisfied and left the room wishing her good night. As soon as the door closed, Eleanor rushed to her cell phone and sent an urgent message to Philip. "Tomorrow I'm going out with her. I think it's a trap. Help me." Thursday dawned cloudy, with a heavy sky threatening rain. Eleanor had barely slept during the night. She tossed and turned in bed, thinking about all the possibilities of what could happen that day. Philip had replied to her message late at night saying he would activate a police contact and try to locate her via her cell phone's GPS. He asked her to keep the device always on and, if possible, drop breadcrumbs, like in the story of Hansel and Gretel, so he could track her if something went wrong. Eleanor laughed nervously at the comparison, but understood the seriousness of the situation. She dressed carefully, choosing comfortable clothes and a light coat. She put her cell phone in her coat pocket, making sure it was fully charged. Before going downstairs, she wrote a letter to Robert, explaining everything she had discovered about Michelle, and hid it inside a book on her shelf with a visible note saying, "Read in case of emergency." If something happened to her, at least her son would know the truth. She went down to the kitchen at 8 o'clock. Michelle was already there, having coffee, with a radiant expression. She wore a light printed dress and seemed genuinely excited about the outing. She greeted Eleanor with a kiss on the cheek and said that Colin was already preparing the car. They would have breakfast quickly and leave soon to enjoy the whole day. Robert had already left for the office, so they would be alone on this trip. Colin appeared at the kitchen door, his face pale and his eyes avoiding direct contact with Eleanor. She realized that he also knew something was wrong. Michelle picked up a large bag, put a thermos with coffee and some snacks inside, and the three headed for the garage. The car was a black SUV, spacious and comfortable. Michelle sat in the passenger seat next to Colin, and Eleanor went to the back seat. They left London on the M4 motorway, heading towards the countryside. Michelle chatted animatedly about the small town they were going to visit, describing the charming shops and cozy cafes. Eleanor replied in monosyllables, remaining alert. Colin was in absolute silence, just driving, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. After almost an hour of travel, Michelle asked Colin to take a detour. She said she knew a shortcut that would save time. He hesitated for a second but obeyed. They left the main highway and entered a secondary road with uneven asphalt. The landscape changed. Houses became scarcer, giving way to vacant lots and dense vegetation. Eleanor felt her heart race. This didn't look like a shortcut to anywhere. Michelle continued talking, but her tone had changed. It was colder, more calculated. Then, suddenly, she asked Colin to stop the car. He obeyed, parking in a secluded area off the road, near a plot of land that looked like an old abandoned warehouse. There was rubble everywhere, construction debris, old furniture, and accumulated trash. The smell was strong, a mixture of mold and decomposition. Michelle turned to Eleanor with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said they had arrived at their destination. Eleanor felt her blood run cold. She asked where they were, but Michelle didn't answer. Instead, she signaled to Colin, who opened the back door of the car, and with tears in his eyes, asked Eleanor to get out. She refused, saying she wanted to go home immediately. Michelle then showed something she carried in her bag, a small black discreet gun. She said it would be better if Eleanor cooperated. The world spun around Eleanor. She had always known Michelle was dangerous, but she never imagined it would come to this. She got out of the car, her legs trembling. Colin held her arm, not with violence but with firmness, and led her to the middle of the abandoned warehouse. There he tied her hands with a rope that was already prepared. Eleanor looked into his eyes, seeking some sign of humanity, and saw only despair and guilt. Michelle approached her, putting the gun back in her bag. She said coldly that Eleanor had been too curious, that she had asked too many questions, talked to the wrong people. She said she knew about the journalist, about the photos, about everything. She had contacts who informed her about her mother-in-law's every move, and now Eleanor would pay the price for her interference. She wouldn't kill her, Michelle said, because she didn't need to. It was enough to leave her there in that forgotten place where no one would find her for days. When she was finally found, if she was, it would be too late. Michelle would have already disappeared with the embezzled money, and Robert would be financially and emotionally ruined. Eleanor tried to speak, but Michelle put tape over her mouth. She said she didn't want to hear please. She turned to Colin and ordered him to go back to the car. He hesitated, looking at Eleanor with tears streaming down his face. Michelle yelled at him, reminding him of the photos, the threats, everything she could do to his family. Colin lowered his head and followed Michelle back to the car. Before getting into the vehicle, Michelle looked back one last time and said aloud, so Eleanor could hear, "You should have stayed tending your flowers, Mrs. Morrison, but you chose to play detective. Now, you'll learn that excessive curiosity has consequences." With that, they got into the car and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Eleanor remained there, alone, tied up, amidst the trash and rubble. The sun was starting to get hot and the surrounding smell was almost unbearable. She tried to free herself, but the ropes were too tight. She felt tears stream down her face, not of despair, but of anger. Anger at having been naive, at not having acted faster, at not having been able to protect Robert from this woman. But then she remembered her cell phone. It was in her coat pocket. If she could reach it, she could call for help. She tried to move her hands, contorting herself to reach the pocket, but it was difficult. The ropes hurt her wrists and every movement was painful. She wouldn't give up. She couldn't give up. Robert needed her. Philip was trying to locate her. She needed to resist. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Robert arrived early from the office. He found the house empty. He called for his mother but got no answer. He asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Irene, where Eleanor was. She said that the mistress had gone out that morning with Michelle for a trip to the countryside. Robert was surprised. His mother rarely went out, and Michelle had never shown interest in spending time with her mother-in-law. Something was wrong. He tried to call Michelle's cell phone. She didn't answer. He called his mother's cell phone. No answer either. He started to get nervous. He went up to Eleanor's room, looking for a clue. It was then that he saw the note in the book. "Read in case of emergency." He picked up the letter and began to read. With each word, his face grew paler. Eleanor described everything: her suspicions about Michelle, the forged documents, the meeting with the man at the cafe, Colin's involvement, the threats. At the end, she said that if anything happened to her, he should look for Philip Carter, the journalist who had all the information. Robert felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The woman he loved, whom he trusted blindly, was a criminal, and his mother was in danger. He picked up the phone and immediately called the police. Philip Carter was in his small apartment in the Soho district, reviewing documents on his computer when he received an alert on his tracking app. Eleanor's GPS had stopped moving almost 2 hours ago in an isolated location, far from any route that would lead to a tourist town in the countryside. His heart pounded. Something had gone very wrong. He grabbed his cell phone and tried to call her. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He grabbed his car keys and was about to leave when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered cautiously. On the other end of the line, a male voice, tense and desperate. It was Robert Morrison. He said he had found a letter from his mother explaining everything, that she was in danger and that he needed Philip's help immediately. Philip didn't waste time with formalities. He said he knew where Eleanor probably was, showed Robert the approximate tracking address, and they agreed to meet at the nearest police station in that region to contact the police. Robert left the mansion at speed, driving as he had never driven before. At every red light he hit the steering wheel in frustration. How had he not noticed? How had he been so blind? All the signs were there. Michelle's distance, her strange behaviors, her evasiveness. But he was so absorbed in work, so confident in his wife, that he didn't want to see the truth that was right before his eyes. He arrived at the police station at the same time as Philip. The two met in the parking lot and quickly introduced themselves. Philip showed the police inspector in charge all the evidence he had collected, the documents photographed by Eleanor, the records of suspicious movements by the Foundation, Marcus Allen's history, and especially the GPS location that showed where Eleanor was. Inspector Charles Anderson, an experienced officer, listened carefully and immediately activated a rescue team. He said they would go to the location indicated by the tracker, but that they needed caution, as if Michelle was armed. The situation could become dangerous. Meanwhile, at the abandoned warehouse, Eleanor finally managed to reach her cell phone in her pocket. With numb and trembling fingers, she managed to pull it out and unlock it using facial recognition, as her hands were tied. She tried to dial Robert, but her fingers slipped and the device fell onto the dirty concrete floor. The screen cracked, but the phone still worked. She managed to drag herself to it, and with enormous effort picked up the device with her mouth and positioned it to make an emergency call. She dialed Philip's number. He answered on the first ring. Eleanor's voice, muffled by the adhesive tape she had managed to partially remove using her shoulder, was weak but clear. "Philip, I'm in a warehouse. Lots of trash. It smells very bad. She left me here. Please find me." Philip said they were already on their way, not to hang up the phone, to keep talking so he could hear her. Eleanor felt a wave of relief. She was no longer alone. Robert, who was in the police car next to Philip, heard his mother's voice on speakerphone and felt tears well up. He told her he was coming to hold on, that he would be there soon. Eleanor, with a choked voice, apologized for not having told him everything sooner. Robert said it didn't matter, that the important thing was that she was okay, that he should have believed her from the beginning. The police cars sped along the motorway and then the secondary road. The GPS indicated they were close. When they arrived at the location, they saw the abandoned plot, the rubble, and in the distance a figure sitting on the ground. It was Eleanor. The police quickly got out of the cars and ran to her. Robert arrived first, falling to his knees beside his mother and hugging her tightly. She was dirty, her face stained with tears and dust, her wrists bruised by the ropes, but she was alive. One of the police officers cut the ropes. Robert helped his mother up and led her to the car, where she could sit and drink water. Philip approached and asked if she was okay. Eleanor nodded, still in shock, but alive. She said Michelle had fled with Colin, that they were probably already far away. Inspector Anderson picked up the phone and launched an operation to locate the car. All exits from London would be monitored. Michelle would not leave the county without being detected. Robert was torn between the relief of having found his mother and the pain of discovering the truth about Michelle. He asked Eleanor how he had been so naive. She held her son's hand and said that love sometimes blinds us, that it wasn't his fault. Michelle was an experienced manipulator who knew exactly what to do and say to control the people around her. But now the truth had come to light, and she could no longer hide who she really was. Back in the city, the police intensified the search for Michelle and Colin. They discovered that she had an offshore bank account in the name of a phantom company with over £3 million deposited in the last 2 years. The money came from embezzlement from the foundation, using fictitious projects as a facade. Marcus Allen was also identified as the intermediary who facilitated these transactions. An arrest warrant was issued for the three. That night, Robert took Eleanor back to the mansion. Mrs. Irene, the housekeeper, was horrified to see her mistress's state and immediately prepared a hot bath and a light meal. Eleanor bathed, put on clean clothes, and for the first time in many hours felt minimally human again. But the physical marks were superficial compared to the emotional ones. She had been betrayed, abandoned, left to perish, and all this by a woman who pretended to be kind, who preached charity and helping others. Robert couldn't stop blaming himself. He sat next to his mother in the living room and broke down. He said he should have listened to her concerns from the beginning, that he should have investigated when she mentioned her suspicions. Eleanor comforted him, saying that the important thing was that now they knew the truth and that they could rebuild. The foundation would be audited, the true projects would be maintained, and the people who genuinely needed help would continue to be assisted, but now with transparency and honesty. Philip, who had followed the entire operation, returned to the newspaper newsroom and began to write the story. It would be one of the biggest reports of his career. But before publishing, he called Robert and asked for authorization. He said the story needed to be told, so that other people would not be deceived, but that he would respect the family's privacy if they preferred. Robert thought for a moment and said that Philip should publish. The truth needed to come to light. Lies and secrets only caused more pain. The next morning, the police received an anonymous tip. Someone had seen a car matching the description of the black SUV at a gas station on the border with the county of Kent. When the police arrived at the location, they found the car abandoned in a nearby parking lot. Michelle and Colin had fled, but they couldn't go far. The authorities had already blocked their bank accounts and alerted Interpol about their escape. It was only a matter of time until they were captured. Colin, consumed by guilt, could no longer bear the weight of his actions. That afternoon he turned himself in at a police station in Bristol. He confessed everything: his involvement with Michelle, the threats she made, the embezzlement of money, the abandonment of Eleanor in the warehouse. He said he was remorseful, that he never meant to harm anyone, that he was coerced and manipulated. His testimony was fundamental to strengthening the accusations against Michelle and Marcus Allen. Based on Colin's testimony, the police discovered that Michelle was hiding in a cheap hotel in Dover, planning to cross the border into France. An operation was mounted, and the next morning she was arrested. There was no resistance. Michelle simply sat on the hotel bed when the police entered, with a blank, defeated look. She knew it was over. Michelle's arrest was news in all London newspapers and television channels. The woman, who was seen as an example of philanthropy and social dedication, had been unmasked as a sophisticated swindler, capable of deceiving everyone around her, including her own husband. Philip's article was prominently published in the London Truth and quickly gained traction in larger media outlets. People were shocked to discover that the vibrant Hope Foundation, which apparently helped thousands of people, was actually a facade for embezzling millions of pounds. Robert spent the following days in a kind of trance. He needed to deal with legal issues, respond to authorities, give interviews to clarify his innocence, and separate his image from Michelle's. It was painful to discover that many people judged him, thinking he was an accomplice to his wife's schemes. But little by little, with the help of Philip and the testimonies of Colin and other witnesses, it became clear that Robert truly knew nothing. He was another victim of Michelle's manipulation. The audit of the foundation revealed a complex and well-structured scheme. Michelle had created fictitious social projects, using names of real communities but false addresses. She falsified reports, doctored photographs, and even paid people to pose as beneficiaries during occasional visits from sponsors. The embezzled money was transferred to offshore accounts through shell companies with the help of Marcus Allen, who received a commission for each transaction. In total, over the past 3 years, more than £5 million had been stolen. But the audit also brought a surprising discovery. Not all of the foundation's projects were fake. There were genuine programs that truly helped needy people. The mechanics course Colin had taken years ago was real. There was a community daycare centre in the Peckham neighbourhood that received true support. There was a food basket distribution program in Brixton that actually worked. Michelle had mixed real projects with fictitious ones to give credibility to the scheme and avoid suspicion. This meant that not everything was lost. The foundation could be rebuilt, keeping only what was legitimate. Eleanor, still physically recovering from the trauma, decided she wanted to actively participate in this reconstruction. She told Robert that she had spent years feeling useless, just watching life pass by, but that now she had a purpose. She wanted to help restore the family's reputation and ensure that people who truly needed help continued to be assisted. Robert was moved by his mother's determination and agreed. Together they began to plan a new structure for the foundation with total transparency, independent auditing and rigorous controls. Meanwhile, in the women's prison where Michelle awaited trial, she finally had time to reflect on her actions. At first, she maintained an arrogant posture, refusing to speak with psychologists or social workers. But little by little, the reality of her situation began to weigh on her. She had lost everything: her husband, her freedom, her reputation, her money. And most painfully, she had lost the chance to be who she pretended to be. Because deep down, part of her genuinely wanted to help people. She had grown up poor in a broken family and knew what it was like to be in need. But somewhere along the way, greed had overcome compassion, and she had transformed into what she most hated. One day she received a visit from a lawyer appointed by her family. The woman was professional, direct, but not devoid of humanity. She explained to Michelle the gravity of the accusations and the reality of the legal situation. With Colin's testimony, the documentary evidence, the bank records, and Eleanor's testimony, it would be almost impossible to avoid a severe conviction. The only thing that could help reduce the sentence would be full cooperation, returning the money still in offshore accounts and demonstrating genuine remorse. Michelle listened to everything in silence and, for the first time in a long time, cried. They were not tears of self-pity, but of shame. She asked about Robert. The lawyer said he was well, that he was rebuilding the foundation with his mother's help, and that he had filed for divorce. Michelle expected this, but hearing it aloud still hurt. She asked if she could write him a letter. The lawyer said yes, but warned that Robert might not want to receive it. That night, Michelle wrote a long letter on several sheets of paper. She didn't ask for forgiveness because she knew she didn't deserve it, but she tried to explain how she had reached that point, how ambition had blinded her, how she had hurt people who didn't deserve it. She wrote especially about Eleanor, recognizing the strength and courage of the woman she had tried to destroy. She said she understood if Robert never wanted to see her again, but that she was grateful he had saved his mother in time. She ended by saying that she would spend the rest of her life trying to understand where she had gone wrong and trying somehow to do something good, even from inside a prison. The letter was sent, but Robert only read it weeks later. When he finally had the courage to open the envelope, he sat in the garden, on the bench where his mother used to spend her afternoons. He read every word carefully, feeling a mixture of emotions, anger, sadness, disappointment, but also a remnant of compassion. The woman who wrote that letter seemed different from the one he had known. She seemed for the first time human and vulnerable. He showed the letter to Eleanor. She read it in silence, her eyes moist. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully and returned it to her son. Robert asked, "Have you forgiven her?" Eleanor thought for a long moment before answering, "I'm learning. Forgiveness isn't a switch you turn on. It's a long, sometimes painful path. But I'm walking it, one step at a time, because holding on to hatred would only hurt me more. She is already paying for what she did. I don't need to carry that weight too." Robert hugged his mother, feeling immense gratitude for having her in his life. He realized that despite everything, something good had come out of that terrible situation. He had learned to see beyond appearances, to value what truly mattered, and never again to underestimate the people who genuinely loved him. Philip, fulfilling his role as a journalist, continued investigating. He discovered that Marcus Allen had carried out similar schemes with other charities in different counties. His dossier was fundamental to several other investigations. The man was arrested and also awaited trial. His corruption network was dismantled, and many victims were finally able to seek justice. Colin's story was perhaps the most tragic. He had been used, manipulated, and emotionally destroyed. His wife, upon discovering his involvement with Michelle, filed for divorce. His children no longer wanted to speak to him. He had lost everything out of fear and weakness. But by testifying against Michelle and cooperating with the authorities, he managed to get a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to community service and underwent intensive psychological counseling. Slowly, he began to rebuild his life. Robert, in a gesture of compassion, offered to help him find a new job when he completed his sentence. He said that everyone deserved a second chance if they were truly willing to change. The new foundation, renamed the Phoenix Institute, was officially inaugurated 6 months after the entire scandal. Robert and Eleanor were at the ceremony, alongside Philip, local authorities and representatives of the communities that would benefit. There was no pomp, no fiery speeches. It was simple, honest, and transparent, exactly as it should have been from the beginning. Eleanor, as she cut the inauguration ribbon, felt that she was finally doing something meaningful with her life. She was not just the mother of someone important, she was important in her own right. A year had passed since that terrible day at the abandoned warehouse. The mansion in Belgravia had come back to life, but it was a different life. Lighter, truer. Eleanor woke up every morning with a clear purpose. After coffee, she went down to the garden and tended her flowers with the same dedication as always, but now with a peaceful smile on her face. The roses had bloomed with more vigor that year, as if they felt the peace that finally inhabited that place. Robert had also changed. He was no longer the work-obsessed businessman who spent his days in the office without looking around. Now he set aside time to be with his mother, to have lunch with her, to listen to her stories about the past, about the father he had barely known. He had learned that professional success without genuine human connections was empty. The loneliness he had felt throughout his marriage to Michelle had been replaced by a sense of belonging that only true family could provide. The Phoenix Institute was flourishing. Social projects were audited monthly, every penny was tracked, and beneficiaries had an active voice in decisions. Eleanor actively participated in meetings, surprising everyone. With her sagacity and keen eye for detail, she, who had spent years feeling invisible, was now respected and heard. Robert joked, saying he should have hired her as director from the beginning, and she laughed, saying perhaps so, that many things would have been different. Philip Carter had won several journalistic awards for his coverage of the case, but what he was most proud of were not the trophies on the shelf, but the messages he received from people thanking him for exposing the truth. Other victims of similar schemes had gained courage to report them. Institutions were implementing stricter controls. The report had caused a real change, and that was worth more than any professional recognition. He and Eleanor kept in frequent contact. She invited him to lunch at the mansion occasionally, and he gladly accepted, always bringing a bouquet of flowers for her garden. Colin had completed his community service sentence, working precisely on one of the Phoenix Institute's projects. He helped teach basic mechanics to young people from deprived communities, passing on the knowledge he himself had acquired years ago. The work had been therapeutic for him, seeing the students' eyes light up when they fixed their first engine, when they understood how the parts fit together, restored a bit of the dignity he had lost. His ex-wife still hadn't completely forgiven him, but she allowed him to see his children once a month. It was little, but it was a start. He knew it would take years to rebuild those bridges, but he was willing to try. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Robert was in the garden helping his mother plant new jasmine seedlings when the gate rang. It was the postman, bringing a registered letter. Robert signed for it and looked at the envelope. It came from the prison. It was from Michelle. He looked at his mother, hesitant. Eleanor gestured for him to open it. They sat on the garden bench, and Robert read the letter aloud. Michelle wrote, saying that she had had a lot of time to reflect on her actions. She had started therapy with a volunteer psychologist who visited the prison. She was participating in support groups and, for the first time in her life, was facing her inner demons. She recognized that she had grown up in an environment where survival meant always being ahead, always gaining advantages, and that she had carried that mentality into adulthood without ever questioning whether it was right or wrong. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, not from Robert, not from Eleanor, not from anyone, but she wanted them to know that she was trying to become a better person. She had offered to give lectures to other inmates on financial education and honest entrepreneurship, using her own story as an example of what not to do. Some women inside had made mistakes out of desperation, out of lack of options, and Michelle wanted to help them find better paths when they were released. At the end of the letter, there was a paragraph specifically addressed to Eleanor. Michelle thanked her for having had the courage to investigate, not to keep silent, to protect Robert even when no one believed her. She said that Eleanor was stronger than she appeared, and that she, Michelle, had completely underestimated that woman. She ended by saying that she hoped the flowers in the garden remained beautiful, because even amidst the garbage of life, there would always be room for beautiful things to grow. Robert finished reading and remained silent, processing the words. Eleanor took a deep breath and said, "She is changing, or at least she is trying. That's all we can ask of someone who made so many mistakes." Robert nodded. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. Perhaps one day he would reply. Or perhaps not. The important thing was that he could move forward, without hatred, without bitterness, just with the lesson learned. At that moment, a 5-year-old boy came running through the garden. It was Raphael, Eleanor's grandson, a son Robert had from a previous relationship that had been kept discreet for years. After Michelle's divorce, Robert had finally publicly acknowledged his paternity and brought the boy to live with him and Eleanor. The child was a constant joy in the mansion, running among the plants, asking questions about everything, filling the house with laughter. Raphael tugged at his grandmother's hand, asking her to help him plant a seed he had found in the yard. Eleanor smiled, got up from the bench, and went with her grandson to the flower bed. Robert watched the two, his mother with her white hair and his son with his dark curls, both kneeling in the dirt planting together. It was a simple scene but full of meaning. It was about new beginnings, about hope, about the strength of life that insists on sprouting even in the most improbable places. Philip appeared at the gate at that moment, invited to a barbecue Robert was hosting. He brought with him a new girlfriend, a teacher he had met at a lecture on investigative journalism. Eleanor greeted them with warm hugs and introduced Raphael, who immediately dragged Philip to see the garden and show him all the plants his grandmother had taught him the names of. The afternoon passed peacefully. They ate, talked, laughed. Mrs. Irene, the faithful housekeeper, served a lemon pie that was a house specialty. Robert looked around the table, seeing the people he loved, and felt profound gratitude. He had lost a lot in the last year, a marriage, an illusion, a part of his innocence. But he had gained something much more valuable, the truth, closeness with his mother, a son he could publicly acknowledge, true friends. When the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, Eleanor returned to the garden to water the plants one last time. Robert accompanied her, and the two walked, in silence among the flower beds. They stopped before the rose bushes, which were especially beautiful that day. Eleanor delicately touched one of the petals and said, "You know, son, for a long time I thought my life was over when your father left. I thought all that was left for me was to wait for time to pass, but I discovered I was wrong. Life doesn't end as long as we can still plant a seed and watch it grow." Robert hugged his mother, feeling the weight of those words. Eleanor was right. They had crossed a terrible storm, had seen the worst of human nature, had been betrayed and hurt. But they survived. And more than that, they had chosen not to let the pain turn them into bitter people. They had chosen to forgive, to rebuild, to move forward. That night, before going to sleep, Eleanor wrote in her diary something she hadn't done in years. She wrote about the last year, about everything that had happened, about the lessons learned. She ended with a sentence that summarized everything. "Pain can be the bitterest fertilizer, but if we know how to use it, it will grow the most beautiful flowers. And I learned that, even in the most improbable places, even among the trash and abandonment, there will always be roots that resist and flowers that are reborn." She closed the diary, turned off the light, and lay down, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Outside in the garden, the flowers slept under the moonlight, lulled by the gentle breeze of the London night. And tomorrow, when the sun rose again, they would be there, firm and beautiful, reminding everyone that life always finds a way to flourish. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Eleanor, Robert and Michelle has deeply touched your hearts. Stories like this remind us that truth always finds its way, that courage can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that forgiveness is a journey worth taking. If this narrative moved you, be sure to subscribe to our channel to continue following stories that explore the complexity of life, the challenges of human relationships, and the strength of hope. Leave your like so we can bring these stories to even more people who need to hear them. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever been in a situation where you needed courage to reveal a difficult truth? What was your experience like? We would love to read and chat with you. Every day we bring new stories that celebrate human resilience and the ability to start anew. Until the next story, and remember, like Eleanor's flowers, we too can be reborn.